So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start and introduce our first speaker, who I want to thank for coming all the way from Omaha to speak to us today. His name is Tony Peterson, and he's an agent with the FBI, and we just learned that he was actually stationed at Juneau, Alaska for 5 years. What I didn't realize is that has about 300 days of rain, so that's a little tough of an area, but we're excited to have him in Omaha, and for sure very thankful for him to come and talk to us about this topic, which he is really involved in. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Tony. Thank you.
Is that good? All right. My name's Special Agent Anthony Peterson. Tony's fine. I'm with the Omaha office, like she said. Right now I'm working on the Cyber Task Force, or the Cyber Squad. We primarily work on cyber intrusion cases, more of your corporate intrusions, things like that. But you'll see more. We get a lot of work because pretty much everything involves computers, and computer intrusions becoming a giant business for large parts of the world, especially dealing with Americans. Prior to this, I was with the FBI for 5 years in Alaska. I did do computer crimes there as well. And then prior to that, I was with the Omaha Police Department. To get into the presentation here on cyber threats, there's a few things that will pertain more or less to what you guys are probably interested in. So I'll take more time on the things that I think are more important, and I'll kind of get past the other items. So this is just our FBI priorities. Protect the United States from terrorist attack, protect the United States against foreign intelligence operations and espionage, and protect the United States against cyber-based attacks and high technology crimes. The President has put out a directive where the FBI is the lead agency for cyber threats, and that's becoming something that they've really been hitting on for the last few years, because law enforcement is not catching up to criminals when it comes to cyber, when it comes to things happening on computers and, you know, in general, and sadly the United States is not catching up to the rest of the world when it comes to computer technology and computer education. And the internet, computers just make the world a whole lot smaller, so it's a lot easier for someone in India, someone in Romania to victimize someone in the United States over a computer than it would be, you know, 30 years ago when they didn't have that option. So our Cyber Task Force in Omaha, we have county sheriffs, police department, state patrol. We also have the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigations. They are here in Des Moines and in Cedar Rapids. But the Omaha office has someone from the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigations that covers the far western part of the state there. We have FBI agents, analysts, and computer scientists. There we go. There's a bunch of badges. All right. So our goal, and this is important for a lot of people to understand, especially when it comes to victims. When you send $50,000 over the internet to, you know, someone who lied to you, I'm not getting that money back. I'm never getting that money back for you. That's not my job. My job is to find out who committed the crime and arrest that person. So you'll have a lot of people, especially businesses, that turn to, you know, we've been taken over, let's, you know, call the FBI, they'll help us get our business back. That's not something we can do. So especially you guys, you know, either in your law firms talking to clients or yourselves realizing, like, we get taken over, this is something, you know, we need the FBI so they can figure out what's happened, you know, who's done it, and they can solve the crime. But actually repairing and getting back on your feet after that is something that you got to either look to the private sector or in-house to take care of. So that's a lot of times we get the people calling us, you know, and you know, I'm sure everyone's heard of, like, the the Nigerian prince scam, stuff like that. That's not stuff that's going on really anymore. It's romance scams that people will put months into building online relationships with people before they get them to take out loans and send them money. It's just different scams where, and I'll get into it, where they're able to very convincingly pose as just different, entities or the government, and they get, sent money, and those people end up calling us, and we have to tell them, we can't get your money back. If you send it overseas, the chances of us actually getting that back are very, very slim. So our goal for criminals is obviously prosecution. That's something that we've really been working on advancing, is the fact that we're dealing with a crime that doesn't really pay attention to borders. We're starting to really make advancements in going over to other countries and being able to get them to help us prosecute people who are committing crimes in other countries. Obviously, depending on our relationship with the country, like Russia is not that open to us going over there and working with them to get their people. North Korea probably wouldn't be either, but if it's England, if it's Europe, if it's South America, we can usually start working with those cases. Now, everyone's got a budget, and you need to realize it really depends on the size of the case. If someone was able to take $5,000 from your company, we're not going to Australia to arrest that person probably. But if they took $500,000, that's more of what we're going to have to do. Being that we're with the federal government, we have thresholds for prosecution. So it's meeting those thresholds, which is becoming a lot easier the more this happens. So the evidence we get in the criminal investigations that's discoverable, that's something that's going to be out there once we actually do the case, and the courts are publicly open to people. When we're talking about national security side of the house, that's when we're dealing with a lot more of the stuff that we're just gaining intelligence, where we're monitoring people, we're gathering evidence that'll never be released, and those don't go to court. So these are our main threat actors. Hacktivism, I'm sure you heard of Anonymous, people like that, and you will see that they do a lot of denial of service attacks, things like that. Crime should be 10 times bigger than all these others, because that's the biggest by far. Are people going on there, and we'll get into it. They're very simple crimes. The insider threat, disgruntled workforce issues. So that's when you're dealing with a large corporation that you have someone who's on the outs who's able to go in there, either put malicious code in or steal secrets. Espionage is something that we look for, especially if you have a clearance where you are, or you're on a government facility. Terrorism is obviously something that we're tracking, and then warfare. Cyber is going to become a large part of warfare going forward, just because of how connected. I mean, everything that we use now is controlled by computers. So you can turn off power grids, you can turn off, water, you can turn off, all sorts of essential services. So the reason why this is happening is because all of our information is on computers now. Absolutely everything from the healthcare sector of all our patient files have been uploaded onto computers. Financial sector, who have really been leading the IT security, all their information's on computers. And then we have government databases, which I'm sure everyone's aware. Like, I think as working for the government, my information has been stolen like 3 times from the government database. So all of it's on computers, and all of it can be gotten to. And really, the main point of this is that there's so many ways that they can get to you, that if someone really wants to and they have the resources, they absolutely will break into your system and take your information. It just really depends on how badly they want to and how much time they're willing to devote to it. These are all companies that have been hacked and had information stolen from one way or another. be it the servers hacked like Ashley Madison, the point of sale system from Target, Sony's email hack, and then, yeah, the United States Office of Personnel Management, just showing you that these large corporations that should have giant IT departments can be gotten to. So hacktivism, we're seeing this more around events like, you know, the Democratic National committees then going on in Philadelphia. Once you have large events like that, the G8 summit, you'll start seeing hacktivism. Or when you had the police shootings, you had people going on and shutting down the department's websites, things like that. Hacktivism can come in a lot of different forms. Usually you don't see them demanding money, you don't see things like that. It's mainly either gathering information to release it in a public forum, like, you know, a WikiLeaks type thing, or it's going to be they determined that, you know, shutting down this internet site is going to do some good for them. When it comes to businesses especially, this can be a problem. A few years ago, Amazon said that every minute they are down, they lose $140,000 for every minute they're down. So, and I'm sure that's gone up exponentially for how, you know, big their business is. So while, you know, years and years ago, someone was able to take them down for, I think, a few hours, if someone did it now, you know, it would go into the millions in just a number of minutes. Business email compromise. This is one of the biggest things that we're seeing, and we're seeing it hit all sorts of businesses. We've seen it in law firms. We've seen it, you know, when it comes to financial advisors. This is when you communicate with your client in email can definitely be susceptible to this, because, you know, if you have a client, you don't want to, you know, you've been sending emails back and forth for years with them, and that's just how you communicate. And this is something that just happened to us in Omaha, and it cost a financial service company around $280,000 because the client's email was taken over, sent the advisor, you know, a couple emails asking to transfer all this money. The wording was exactly like she always worded it. The little way she signed it was exactly the same. It looked like it was coming from her email. So they sent the money to this different bank account that wasn't hers. And you need to realize you're going to see emails that look like they're coming from the CEO, that look like they're coming from the CEO's secretary. They can spoof that. They can do it a few different ways. They can either go in there and actually compromise the email to where they have control of that email, and the ones that we've seen have been very good. They'll do it so much as you still have control of your own email, and they'll delete all the sent ones that they're doing. They'll delete all the replies so you don't see them, so you don't realize someone else is going in there. Or they'll spoof it so they are, you know, masking as yours, or they'll, you know, get a GoDaddy website that's just one word off and open up an email, so like you have to read and then you see, oh wait, the A and the E are backwards on that. And they are going in and sending, I mean, we are getting complaints of hundreds of thousands of dollars weekly from hospitals, from different corporations, saying that, you know, the secretary got an email from the CEO saying, you know, transfer $80,000, so she did, and now we sent this Western Union to Jamaica, what do we do? Well, it's gone at that point, and then we're left to try to figure out, okay, how did they get in? What sort of actions were taking place? The best way to prevent this is, when you're transferring money, always call the person. If something in this email is different than, you know, just general, hey, how's the weather, you know, call the person. Now the part where humans, that's not going to work is because we're lazy, and we get into, you know, the habit of just wanting to do it the fastest, most efficient way. Everyone's busy, so calling them to double check everything, it can be time consuming. Yes.
So do you see this, you talked about the transfer of funds, and I've actually had that happen to a friend's company here in Des Moines, but what are they, only asking for transfer of funds, or are you starting to see where it's transfer of data or personal identifiable information or something like that, a file perhaps?
So there's a few things that we've seen. I don't think I've seen them do that, but you know, you guys being law firms, I'm not sure if everyone practices the same thing, but you know, if you're a divorce attorney and I can mask as my ex-wife and ask for information, I'm sure someone might do that. We're seeing people send attachments this way because everyone's told, you know, don't open attachments, don't open attachments, you know, if you don't know who the sender is. Well, if the sender looks like it's your boss, you're going to probably open the attachment. And I'll get into, like, that is the #1 way they're compromising networks. So the money is the fast, easy money, so that's the #1 thing that we're seeing a lot. That's what we're seeing mostly. But other than that, like, we have seen where they send attachments that we believe they were trying to compromise the entire network. So yeah, whether the personal identifying information, I think that they would have to have a specific target, and we haven't seen that. To go over who we're seeing most of these come from, most of them are Eastern European of origin. So there's a good chance, unless you are a very well-known public figure, they're just going after a company and seeing what they can get. And this is someone who's probably sending out hundreds of these every day, just seeing which ones take. So we haven't seen anyone who's really identified and honed in on wanting to get a certain person's information yet. That's not saying that it's not out there and hasn't been reported, because there's a chance that these have happened where people don't even realize. Just the money always seems to come up because at the end of the month, they realize a large debit has happened, and no one has any idea who approved it. So this is showing you just the compromised email impact in the U.S. And this is, I can guarantee you, this is old and out of date, and it's going to be twice this. U.S. alone, over $1.3 billion lost. Internationally, it's, you can see less than we have, about a third of what we have here. And then overall, almost $2 billion. Now, you'll notice that we're getting, as far as we can tell from the data we're getting targeted more than pretty much anywhere else, because we're seen, especially in Eastern Europe, as being easy targets and having a lot of income. So we're the ones who are getting hammered with this right now. Oops. There we go. So the way that these scams are set up a lot, and this is the way romance scams will be set up, and other scams that you'll see, are there will be United States mules. We've seen this in everything from, as on here, a lottery scam, a romance scam, the employment scams. Another one that's going on is they will set up websites, and I mean criminals, where they offer to repair your computer. Just send us this money, and then you're pretty much infecting your computer and sending the money to do it at the same time. So online auction scams. So what they'll do normally is they'll get, someone roped in a romance scam, and then start slowly convincing them, okay, someone's going to be sending you money, you need to send that money now on to someone else. My very first investigation in the FBI, I thought a man was sending drug money over to Malaysia, because within a few months he had sent over $150,000 to Malaysia. I met with him probably 4 times, and he still would not believe me that this 19-year-old, girl from Malaysia wasn't in love with him. He was, in his 70s and retired. So when we tracked where he was sending it, though, he was sending it to another person in the U.S. that was then sending it to another person in the U.S. that was then sending it overseas. And we've had so much as I did, I got another person who was a mule over in Juneau when I worked there, and he was like the fourth ring in it before they sent it to Canada, and it bounced around Canada a few times before it got sent over. So the mules all tend to be able to take a little off the top, and I think that's their motivation to keep going. The second one I talked about, he thought he won the Facebook lottery, and he was told that he'd be paid 5% of this money for the rest of his life, and that's what he won. The issue you get is you get, semi-low functioning people who are, desperate for money, who are then convinced of something that's, probably not true, that will buy into it until, it's really thrown in their face otherwise. So here's just an example of a business compromise email. This is from CEO to secretary. And what we're seeing is that they will go in and they will, when they take over it, they'll read the emails to see exactly how this person writes, how they sign, to make sure they look identical to something that it doesn't raise so much suspicion that, that you're going to go to the CEO to ask him. So prevention, it's always going to be the two-factor authentication of it. Just a phone call, or the meeting, or just have something in place of, hey, if we're ever to wire money, here's, you're going to get an email and, this other thing, and I'm going to contact you some other way, or just know that that's going to be a part of it. Otherwise, you're opening yourself up. This is the same thing I tell everyone when I talk to the healthcare people about opening attachments. Unless the person just saw you in the hallway and said, hey, I'm about to send you this attachment, give them a call and ask. This is, the #1 way that they're compromising networks, taking over networks. Another thing, start registering all the domains that are similar to your company's name. So, if you can, register all the common misspellings of your company just to own those domains. Because we have seen a lot of times where they'll do that. They'll go out and get domains that are just, misspellings of your company's name, that are just one word or one letter off. So if you are a victim of this, we do, as much as I tell you we can't get the money back, we do want you to contact us because we are trying to get a handle on it. Now, while this isn't an extremely new crime, actually going off and trying to enforce it has been somewhat new. So we do at least want to know how big of a problem this is in the United States, so we can pressure, Congress into giving us more money, so we can talk to our partners overseas into, trying to help us combat this. Evidence we're going to ask you for. Emails, we need email headers. So, and if you don't know what that is, just ask, your IT people, or just don't delete them, save them on your computer. So ransomware. Ransomware is probably the biggest complaint we're getting. It's the thing I talk about the most. I have some experience with it. When I worked in Alaska, I worked online undercover, and I had 2 of my computers taken over with ransomware, just from what I was doing, which to me, I had all my stuff backed up, so I just wiped them and moved on. We see ransomware hitting both law offices. Their main target lately, especially this year, has been healthcare. Hollywood Presbyterian paid $17,000 to get their computers back from some hackers, and once that hit the news, it was told start hitting healthcare because they've got money. They got money and they need their systems back. What they do, and 99.9% of the time, it's an email attachment that's getting it into your system. So people who are concerned with how can we, get our cybersecurity up, how can we do this, it's all about the people working for you and telling them do not open email attachments, even if it's from someone in your office. Unless you go and talk to that person, you call them and they say, I sent that to you, don't open it. It could be a Word document, it can be an Excel document. They can have viruses in there. that take over the entire system. Also, keeping restrictions on the internet, especially the internet that's connected to your main servers that people at work can go to. People look at some weird stuff on the internet. They don't need to be doing it at your work, because that's another way that they will get viruses. They will get things put in the computer, and once they get on, it's the secretary's computer, but it's connected to the whole network. Once it's in her computer, it's in the whole network. By the time you see something like this on your computer, it's probably been, they've probably been in your system for months. We've seen them go so far as they will go in there, they will change the backup schedule and start deleting all your old backups to where you will be 6 or 7 months out of date with backups, and then they'll lock it down. So they will do their best not to make this an easy fix. So our best advice is A, don't ever open anything unless you know for sure where it's from. B, if you have backups, make sure you're backing up on separate media that's not connected to the server. So when we ask, like, do you have backups? People say, yes, yeah. Where are they? They're on the computer. That's not a backup. That's just a refresh point that you put on your computer. A backup is on something separate, so if your computer catches on fire, you will be able to load that on something else. So having your backup on the same system as everything else, it's easily erased by this. And when they take you over, which a lot of people will think, like, how big of a threat is this? It is happening constantly. If you are any sort of public business that has, an online presence, even so much as, here's our law offices, they're going to hit you. They're going to attack you. They're going to at least try. We have, hospitals getting hit. We have tiny little hospitals getting hit. We have tiny businesses getting hit with this. And they'll demand enormous ransoms because, it's negotiation. And that whole time you're negotiating with them, whether you're going to pay them or not, and of course we, as the FBI, advise you not to pay them, you can't use your system. Part of why we advise you not to pay them is, one, we don't want you to further their criminal enterprise, and then two, recently, this is the first time it's happened. It used to be when this first came out that you paid them, you got your system back. And it was kind of just a quick, here's a few $100s, you got your system back. I think Sacred Heart in Kansas had their systems taken over. I believe it was their communication systems. They pay the first ransom, and the guys up, they go, we would like some more money before we give it back. And that's what's going to start happening more and more now. Because the software to do this is becoming so available, and just how much money these guys are making is becoming obvious, especially for where they live, that it's not the first people doing it and kind of trying to keep their business plan clean so people keep paying them. These guys are going to do it, and we have no idea what they're doing when they have your system. We have no idea if they're actually ever going to give it back to you. Our advice is to have backups, to practice good cybersecurity, and then from there, once you get taken over, be able to start over fresh.
Can I ask another question?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we would have, if this would have happened, we would have got you guys involved before negotiations. Mm-hmm. How are they negotiating then? And do you negotiate? Well, how does this work?
Well, private firms usually do the negotiations because we'll tell you don't pay them. And depending on what it is and who the private firm is, if you want to go that route, it can really depend. It depends on how they take it over. The things you want to do is, for one, make sure someone who really knows computers looks at them, because we've seen this 3 different ways. One way is they actually do encrypt your system in some way. And once it's encrypted, if you don't have the key, we're not getting it back from you. Another way is they just lock your system. This is, something that most IT departments can just take care of itself. You don't have to worry about. And the third way is this is just a pop-up that you can close. So we've had people freak out from all 3 of those. So you want to make sure you know exactly what you're dealing with. Is my system actually encrypted at this point? Is this something we actually have to listen to? And depending on what sort of information you are, if you're a law office and you have all of your client files online and you haven't backed up in a few months, there's a good chance you may want to pay them, but we're going to advise you not to. And their currency of choice is always Bitcoin. So I believe Western Union sends Bitcoin now, so it's a little bit easier than it used to be. It used to be somewhat of a pain for people to actually pay. The mitigations for this. Patches, software downloads. So we do say, update your systems. So why 90% of the time you're getting infected from emails, the rest of the ones you should close up as many holes as you can. So if there are security updates for your system, put them in there. If they're, you should run an antivirus. Obviously, don't open up, attachments. Have the backup plan. The backup plan is, what you're going to need, because pretty much everyone gets hit at some point with this. So this is a case we had out of Omaha, the Zeus case. So, and these men were over in the Ukraine. And they were running malware where they would take over computers and then attempt to steal money. It ended up being a pretty giant case for us, and I believe we indicted 8 or 9 people. I'd have to read this up. Most of them are still, well, actually all of them are still over in the Ukraine, and we're working on getting them over here. But this was one of the first times we're really able to work with that government and get them to go forward with us to participate, because we were able to send agents over there to do search warrants over there. So this is just showing that we are trying to work in the smaller world where there's, you've got to go across borders to find the stuff. Real quickly, to understand what the threat is and why we're seeing so much, like the ransomware. Ransomware has been around for a long time, but when CryptoLocker came out and once they really started hitting that, which was probably like 5-6 years ago, since then I believe we've found 200 different versions of ransomware where they actually encrypt your software. So I've done some teaching over in Budapest, and we're talking to Romanians and Moldovians, and their level of knowledge of computers was so much higher above our normal level. They teach it in the schools there. They teach it, they push forward. They teach it because they see technology as the future. They are actually aggressively going after it. The entire country of Moldova has Wi-Fi, has very fast Wi-Fi covering the entire country. So the issue is you have a highly educated people, very high unemployment, and easy access to the internet. And that's where a lot of this stuff is coming from. So while, we talked to some great law enforcement over there and they were very educated and they were really trying to work with this, you also have a huge criminal enterprise that also has had the same, access and the same education. So espionage, we've seen some cyber espionage. We don't have a ton of it relatively when it comes to looking at crime and things like that, but it's definitely an issue, especially if you guys have any sort of clearances or you guys work with companies that do have clearances, that vetting employees and then doing all the same things, because state-sponsored cyber attacks are a huge thing. We know China has their own hacking team. Russia has their own hacking team. Iran has them. All these countries are looking for any sort of company or military installation that might have this information. So here's one, just quick, showing you what sort of damage it can do. Look like that. So our new stealth fighter China was able to build pretty much exactly the same stealth fighter. And you got to realize that we probably paid billions to design this, to put it together, and they probably spent thousands to steal the plans and be able to build, nearly the same fighter. So terrorism and the internet, we're seeing a lot on the internet. Like ISIS does have their own hackers, and they will go in. We've had an attack in Omaha where they'll go in and just insert pictures on things. But you also have, disenfranchised people who maybe, know a lot about computers in different countries, or the U.S. who will go in, who will attack, who will, change, steal information, take over websites. The threat to control system. So this has become a pretty big issue. The Ukraine had one of their main power plants shut down by what they believe to be Russian hackers around the time that they were having the issues down in Crimea, because everything's online. If you have skilled enough hackers, they can get in and they can cause havoc with, the power grids, with, shipping lines. We haven't seen too much with air traffic control, but I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen like the things where hackers can go in and take over like the automatic cars. Issues like that are starting to come up. I guess the reason why we need to be vigilant, even though we're not seeing a ton of that, is because this is more of, the loss of human life, and terrorism as opposed to crime is more the loss of money, is that we're seeing over that side. So as the technology advances for the criminals, it also goes over the people who want to cause harm to people. So here's the Ukraine power grid that got taken down. 103 cities were left without power, and they wiped out a lot of the equipment. So they had to go back to manual, and I know pretty much every power company has the ability, but they're still going to be down for hours, and they're still going to not be able to monitor the systems like they used to be. Oh yeah, and then they did, so they had voice over internet phone lines at the power company there, and then they just did a denial of service on that, so no one could call the power company couldn't call out. So they cut off those communications, which we've seen that's been kind of a trend is taking over the communication systems. So a lot of the hospital hacking and ransomware, like the one in Hollywood Presbyterian, is they just took over their internal communication system. That's the only communication they're able to take over. But when you're dealing with a giant hospital and not being able to call from one unit to another, it's probably worth $17,000 from you. So they will get in and they'll look for, what's the easiest target, what can we do, what can we take over to demand money for. So cyber use in warfare, I'm sure everyone's going to use it, just everything is, controlled that way now. And we're all trying to kind of catch up to speed. The government is working hard on getting a lot of people that are cyber trained in the government. I know the FBI is pushing hard to get more and more cyber education when they can. So when you get hacked, there's a few different ways that we see them going down, but most of the time is you're not going to realize it right away. By the time you realize it, it's been too late. So, people will say, like, my computer's starting to slow down, like maybe there's something wrong. You were probably just downloading stuff for months by that time. So reconnaissance is the first one. Depending on what they're looking for, if it's a company or if it's going for a private person, that they will look for your online profile. That's how they'll learn the name of your secretary. That's how they'll learn the name of the CEO when they send the email. Or that's how they'll learn, you know, where you're located or how much money they can possibly get. They'll, you know, open up mail or take over your mail, establish a foothold, and then going in and seeing how far they can get in. So we'll see that, you know, it's not always the quick hits that happen. You know, there's times where they'll spend months being in a company, months getting, you know, getting in there, taking out what they want to take out, getting rid of backups. So spear phishing, this is phishing, as people have heard of, is like the emails that they send out kind of in mass, just looking for a hit. Spear phishing is more of them having a target. So once they've identified a company that they want to compromise, is going after that company. That's why we always say, you know, your number one line of defense for cybersecurity is your people, is making sure that they don't, you know, click on anything that they're not supposed to, that they don't download something, because it can be as instant as just a JPEG. They can insert something in that, or they could mask something else as, you know, an image. So this is just showing you a example of, you know, posing as the IT department or posing as, you know, help desk. We've seen them where they'll come out and say like, hey, this is, you know, IT department for your company. Everyone needs to update this, you know, antivirus right now. Click on this, and people will fall for it. The best things that we've seen are there are companies that you can deal with that will actually send out phishing emails to your corporation, and then they'll let you know like who's clicking on it, like how's that got better. Their information is that, you know, they see like an 80 to 90% drop off of, you know, people who click on the attachments after their first send to their second send. I don't know for sure if that's accurate. I just know that I've heard people say that that was helpful to their company. Social engineering has become a big way that we'll see hackings get in. Through Facebook, through all the stuff people put online, especially if you're, you know, employing younger people, pretty much their whole life is online. You can learn a lot about them. And just through making a phone call, like me calling up saying like, hey, you know, Rebecca, I know you work for Dr. John. This is Jim from Cisco Systems. I've been working on, you know, computers for a while, and I just need your admin password real quick to get back in. You know, I already talked to the doctor. He said it was fine. And how many of those phone calls can they make before they get someone to bite? You know, it's not that hard. For the most part, people do what they think authority tells them to do. If someone calls up asking to be authority, who seems to have a little knowledge about their business, there's a good chance they're going to fall for it. So just, you know, letting your people know what sort of threats are out there, what sort of things, you know, hey, if this happens, make sure you get a hold of me first. If this happens, you know, this isn't the way we do business. It's like when we constantly have to put it out there, like the IRS does not make phone calls to people. The IRS does not send emails. You know, the FBI does not, you know, demand money or you'll be arrested. So it's just things like that, letting people know like, I know you've seen this, but this isn't the way that business is actually done. So for corporations, we say just, you know, educate your employees. That's the biggest thing that we can say. And if you've got an employee who you just can't get it through to them, you know, if you can compartmentalize them on the network, take them off the network, if that's something you have to do, you know, you have to really decide, you know, what's it worth if we might get taken over? What's it worth this person putting us at risk? At home, make sure you're, you know, updating your software. Using strong passwords. We recommend that when you can, your password should be a sentence. It should have multiple words in it. You know, people is telling you like to make your password upper, lowercase, you know, special signal and two numbers. Like, if you make it something you don't remember, that's not good. If I make mine Spot is a good dog, you know, that's a very long password, and that's something I'll remember. You know, I was born in Madison or whatever. Just make it a, you know, something you'll remember, but something that's long enough. So going through how they break passwords is through brute force, which means that they're running a program that's just throwing passwords at your computer over and over again just to see until one gets through. And the whole name of the game there is length and then different characters. So if you're dealing with like just a straight up like server password that can have anything in it, if you make that password 14 digits long, with the technology right now, it's supposed to take them 13 trillion centuries to break it. But if you make that password 6 digits long, it'll take them under 2 seconds to break it. So you just have to realize adding that many more digits or that many more letters are going to make it so much harder to get into. Now the thing is, you can never plug every hole, and you can never, you know, make your network impervious to someone. If someone's really set their sights on you and you've made them mad and they've got the technology and they've got the resources to go after it, they'll probably get in. But what I advise is, although, you know, you don't have to be the fastest person, you just can't be the slowest. If you are the person on the block who leaves your, you know, front door unlocked and wide open, you know, you might get broken into. But if you put up the fake, you know, I've got an alarm system sign and you lock your doors, they will go and find an easier target. So just don't make yourself an easy target. Don't, you know, invite them in. So reporting cyber incidents, we definitely want to know for a few different reasons. We want to know what's actually happening out there. We want to know so we can ask for how many resources we need. And we also want to try to solve these crimes as much as we can. We will, you know, respond to them, and we will look in to see if this is something we've seen before. We want to know if this is, you know, a new threat that we haven't seen, or just to track, like, this is how many CEO, you know, fake CEO emails have come out, and this is how much money it's cost us. So when we go to Congress, when we say, like, hey, we need more cyber training, we need a bigger cyber budget, and this is why, it's this big of a problem. So you will find a lot of, especially larger corporations, when they can, they don't want to release that something like this happened. You know, if it's a private corporation and not publicly traded and they don't have to release it, they probably won't. We've seen some private hospitals that have been taken over and paid ransoms, and they're not going to release how much it was or what happened, because it does, you know, it might make people not trust them as much with their information. So we definitely encourage, like, we will come out, we will respond, we will look at your systems. The only thing is we can't get you back on your feet. Like, I can't fix your system for you, and we probably can't get the money back. But we will try to arrest those involved. So InfraGard is something that we are part of. We run it out of our office, and I believe there's also one in Des Moines. This is a great way for corporations especially to partner up and to kind of share information, because everyone doesn't have the ability to have, you know, a great robust IT unit. So this partnership between the FBI and private sector. There's also state, local law enforcement, academic institutions in it. And the chapters are Omaha and Des Moines in this area, and there's over 200 members. So we definitely encourage anyone who's interested to go to infragard.org and to look into the Des Moines chapter or the Omaha, whichever is closer for you. So with that, are there any questions?
So tell us the number. I think you made mention of Russia and Ukraine. Are those the top countries when it comes to cyber threat?
So when we're seeing criminal cyber threat from places, obviously there's a lot of masking of IP and using proxies. Probably Romania, Russia, Ukraine, and the reason why that is just the level of education and what they've got available to them. And also when you're dealing with countries with, you gotta realize if they do something and get $10,000, in Bitcoin US from us, how much money is that in, Moldova? That's a lot of money. It's worth their time. Where, if you're in Sweden, that's, still a good chunk of money, but it's not quite as much, and you might have more productive things to do and things like that. So while we do see some of this from the U.S., I don't want to say those countries are the only ones putting it out. That's just the majority of what we're seeing. And then that brings up an issue to us of it makes it harder and more out of our reach depending on our relationship with the country. So while I said Russia does do some cooperation with us, and we do work with them when we can. It's just not the easiest of relationships. So it's something that we're definitely trying and we're working on. And, but we also see the stuff out of China, out of, all over the world we'll see this coming from. Just those are the ones that we've seen, and definitely the ransomware has really taken off from that part of the world. I'm sure it's probably spread by now, and that's the issue with things like this is when you're dealing with ransomware, when you're dealing with these takeovers, by the time we get the information out there, they've probably moved on to a new thing. It's like getting a flu shot. It's probably going to cure the last flu, but there's a good chance it doesn't work for this next one. So just things are advancing so fast that we're constantly playing catch up. So that's why we do encourage, like, hey, if something happens, let us know so we can see what's out there. Because it's businesses that actually get hit with this stuff that are letting us know that when we go in there and see what has actually happened, that we can then send out more advice, let people know, and find ways to solve it.
Early on, you had talked about that you have thresholds for prosecution. What are those thresholds, if you don't mind sharing?
So I'd have to look into the actual cyber thresholds. That really depends on the office. So when I was in Alaska, we obviously took cases that were smaller in nature than if I was in New York City. So it's a game of resources and how much is on the plate. So dealing with attorneys is not always the funnest thing to do, and especially getting them to do work where they think that they'll have to go to court. But if I can present a case that's good enough that they think, all right, this is something I need to put my time and effort into. So it's really that. So while anything is technically a federal crime, any number, they're going to want the larger ones that have the minimum mandatory sentences. So I know, I'm trying to think for wire fraud, which is a lot of what we go after, I think it's around $250,000 that we like to see, but we'll definitely look into anything under that. So it really just depends. It's kind of the game of the bigger the issue or the bigger the target, the more resources we're going to be able to put towards it, because so much of this stuff is happening. I mean, just when I was in Juneau, and that's dealing with a small population, because I answered the phones there because it was just me and another guy, the amount of people that called up that, for the romance scams, for the grandchild scam, for all those different scams, it was daily. So when you're dealing with this problem of, how many, businesses have been taken over in Iowa, I guarantee you there's been multiple that have gotten ransomware in Iowa today. Every single day it's hitting. So then you get to such amount that we've got to just, take the ones that are larger.
You mentioned in passing the recent DNC hack, and I think that's kind of interesting. I think you call that hacktivism or something like that. So when the FBI is allocating resources, how do you determine what one, I'd be kind of curious what your thoughts are about all that. But how do you determine what resources to allocate? Do you go after these hacktivists, or do you go after those issues that might have more serious monetary elements to it? You know what I mean? Because while the leaking of the DNC emails might be important or interesting and make a lot of news in terms of repercussions, you know, it can vary depending on your political point of view.
So, and actually I spoke incorrectly. That's more state-sponsored, at least that's what we're saying now. But get back to the question is, so that we're looking for, although it's not monetary, it's the target and then it's the implications. So if what has been put out now, and I'm not on the case, so I only know what you guys know, if we're saying a foreign government is, you know, doing something to possibly affect the presidential election here, that's something that we're definitely going to probably put a lot of resources into. Now, when you're dealing with like the hacktivists, the people who are going out and either defacing websites, doing denial of service attacks, it really depends on the target, how often we've seen them. So it's someone who does a denial of service attack on, you know, a small sheriff's office here. We'll definitely pull logs, and if they made it easy for us, we'll go after them. It's something that we may not have the resources to put a whole lot of work into. Now, if someone has done a denial of service attack on 30 sheriff's offices in the state, you know, this is something we're going to, you know, be able to put more and more resources to. So it's just more of a game of, you know, how much, you know, problems have this person caused. And then that's why you see a lot more of us looking towards the criminal, because that's easy to calculate. That's easy to say, here's the dollar amount. To where you're dealing with taking down of websites and defacing websites, as long as we can't prove it's a foreign actor, it's a little harder to attribute a dollar amount or an hours that the tax dollars we should spend on really looking into this. So I want to be clear that we do definitely look into any sort of tax like that. It's just, you know, pretty much like you guys understand, it's what we can cover, and we want to do the most good we can with our tax dollars and our time. So if, you know, a website's been defaced and they've got it back up and running, that's something that we may not be able to get to for a while.
Well, I want to thank you, especially to Peterson, for coming to speak to us. That's very informative and, to be quite frank, scary. So we appreciate your time, and for those of you who are on the webinar, we will take a 5-minute break and we will be back. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started again. Thank you for taking a short break, and we are going to introduce our two speakers from NineMaster. I'm actually going to introduce both of you because then it'll save time when you guys switch. Our first speaker is Michael Dayton, who is the chairman of the Business Finance and Real Estate Department. He also is a member of our bar's Business Law Section Council, and he routinely assists clients with general contracting matters, including data and cybersecurity matters, which is very important to the topic that we are talking about today. He also does many things with corporate formation, governance issues, commercial lending, regulatory matters, local council appeals. It sounds like you do everything. So you're the one to call for sure. And then Ben Roach is our other speaker, and he will come on right after Michael. He is also a shareholder in the litigation and labor and employment departments, and he is focused on employment law, construction law, contract litigation, and he also does a lot of consulting as well. So I want to thank both of you for taking the time to talk to us about this important matter. And now you need to actually make us feel calmer, because the last speaker just made us feel really concerned about all the things that we need to worry about. So give us some tips. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Ben and I will do that, actually. It's not very, there are certainly presentations our firm gives on what do you do after the cyber attack, but both of our presentations are geared towards what do you do beforehand to try to limit the exposure. I'm in corporate areas, so a lot of the limit I'm trying to do is around your vendors, around contracting. How do you limit your exposure both in the contract and through the procurement process? Perfect. So I'm a contract attorney, so here's a disclaimer. Please call us if you have any specific questions. Like I just mentioned, there's really two focuses here. One is the procurement process itself. In this area especially, I don't know how many of you really work in the contract area generally, but in this area specifically, you find that you don't get the terms you necessarily want. That's part of the industry standard is simply to not give much. Part of the industry, especially when you're dealing with software agreements, is you've got companies that were really software developers and then they decided, hey, this is a great product, we found a need. We never thought about the data security issues or anything like that. We just thought about how we could develop this great software product and provide it to people and make money. Between that and the fact that you might not be paying very much for software, paying $50 or $1,000 or $5,000, means a lot of times the liability of these companies is limited more in this arena than you'd see in other arenas. And then the contract itself. So the procurement process is really the due diligence process. How do you get the right people at the table to make sure that you need to deal with this vendor in the first place and that the vendor is right for you, these products and services are right for you, and then once you do that, what really can you do in the contract? So the provisions I'm talking about here, I don't want, and if you take the PowerPoint with you, I don't want you to confuse them with what would be enough to really give you a full contract, but these are the ones that will really help in the data cybersecurity area. Best disclaimer at all from someone who is a contract attorney, don't rely on the contract in this area, okay? Again, the process is really going to be the most protective thing. So part of the procurement process is how do we get the right people at the table to make the decision on whether we need this product or service and what will the product or service really do to our company from a risk perspective. In an ideal world, you know, you have a company of 2,000 people and you got 1 or 2 people or 5 people to do each of these things and everybody can look at the contract. You guys might be the only people doing this in some of your agreements, but hopefully you at least have an IT department or IT outsource or somebody like that where you can go to for the really technical aspects of this. Probably the biggest protection you can have for your company is making sure in the IT side, the software side, you limit the number of vendors you deal with. Every touch point with a vendor is another likelihood that your information can go out the door, is another likelihood that you get an email from somebody that you recognize, that you work with, that says, I need this or that sends you an email with an attachment that's not accurate. If they have your data and confidential information, you know, how many vendors are they working with? It's just, the world expands. So if you can, part of the procurement process is getting a buy-in from the requesters of the software or the products or services to create a culture where people are really only asking for services and vendors and products that they really need. In many areas of your company, a CEO, a CFO, someone senior leadership team, someone higher up is going to be able to analyze a request like that. We need more people, or we need this piece of massive equipment, something like that. Those generally right now, the officers, the higher up officers in the company are of an age or of a generation where they are not going to be able to analyze whether does my company need this software product or do we need this specific data security or hardware. I know I have no idea about some of the things that our tech committee deals with in our law firm. So if you don't have the people who really know about those things, have a culture of not requesting too much, and ideally if you don't have another person who can analyze that business need, you're likely to have requests that you don't need in the first place, which means you're dealing with vendors you don't need, which opens yourself up. Who else should you bring to the table? Well, the requester, someone who can tell you what's market both in the industry and from your business needs and from financial needs. Again, somebody else who can look over the shoulder of that requester to make sure there is a business need there. Who can you bring to the table that knows what data and confidential information is going to be disclosed so that you're going to be provided as part of the transaction? I mean, a common theme here is the cost that you might incur for a contract is well beyond the normal invoiced fees that you're going to pay on an annual basis. It might be that all of the personally identifiable information of your customers are now at the door. And if you're dealing with a vendor that does not have the financial wherewithal or the insurance to back it up, obviously you are now going to be holding the bag. Who on your team can analyze, if it's a software program, your malware exposure? You don't deal with installed software quite as much anymore, but if it's installed software, how's it going to interact with your systems? What security issues is going to be? Financial solvency, just touched on that. Is your vendor even going to be able to fulfill their obligations? Are you running D&B reports? Do they have insurance? Insurance in this area, and I don't know if the FBI guy talked about it much or anything like that. It's not like a CGL policy where they've been around for 200 years and you know what is covered, property and casualty. A cyber risk policy, these policies are the Wild West right now. There's no uniformity in the policies. So if you're looking at one, it's not the same as looking at the other. Who on your team can review the policy both from a level and a terms of the policy to determine whether that insurance policy is sufficient for you, especially if you're not sure about the financial solvency of your vendor. Obviously, having a lawyer around for legal protection to look at the contract's good. And then what specialists do you need to bring to the table? Is it credit card compliance, PCI compliance? Are you dealing with PHI? So you need somebody with that information. Who else do you need to bring to the table? So a lot of it is really doing the due diligence on the vendor and having processes and the correct procurement people in place in the first place to make sure you're weeding out the potential issues. So again, once you get to the contract, if the person doesn't have money, the paper isn't worth anything. Even if they do, they may have limited their exposure a lot just because that's industry standard. So now that I told you to have like 25 people around the table having a conversation about this, you also need to have a policy. So you don't want to have the conversation every time about who wins. I mean, it could be as easy as we bring the risks up to the CEO, and the CEO always makes a decision, because lots of times the lawyers are going to be like, I would never do this, but it might be the only vendor. This might be the only terms you can get. So it still might make the right business decision. But as a group, having somebody as the leader to make that decision is ideal. So that's the process. The contract itself, I'll talk about in a second. If you're large enough where you're able to go out to RFP for your products and service providers, I would highly recommend getting your standard form contract in there as part of the RFP and have them redline against that as part of your process. And as lawyers, at least, we would like to have those risks taken into account when the purchasing decisions are made for a vendor. Once a vendor knows you've already chosen them and that the business is super excited and you're absolutely choosing them, obviously you've lost a little leverage at that point. So it's ideal if you can do the RFP or negotiate the contract while there are still multiple people out there who might provide the service. You have more leverage at that point. You can get better terms. This slide just lists the contractual provisions that we're going to go over. So the big ticket ones for us, cybersecurity, data security, are confidentiality, data security obviously, compliance with laws, indemnification, limitation, liability, and then we probably talk about every other provision in the contract because they all bleed together. There's a few provisions that really can help you avoid some issues. I'm speaking from the point of view that most of the people most of the people in the audience are persons that don't provide the service but are buyers of products and services. I apologize if I'm wrong in that assumption, but I'm going to speak to that primarily because it's really it's not the service provider, but the person who's purchasing the services that ends up having the data security breach issues. So everything I'm saying, if you're the one providing the services, do the opposite. If you're purchasing the services, this is great for you. So part of that assumption is the confidential information that will be shared will primarily be from the purchaser to the vendor of the service. Lots of times you're getting software and that's considered their confidential information. They don't want you to reverse engineer it or whatever. But usually that's not in, providing and disseminating that type of confidential information isn't an issue. Just limit user access. You're not downloading the software anyway. It might just be software as a service. So it's not like you're ever going to let their confidential information out anyway. So in that regard, you really want to look for a broad definition of confidential information. Would really avoid, especially in this area since it's not practical, lots of times marked as confidential, or we disclose it orally but we'll provide you written summary that things were confidential. That was good in the olden days when we were passing papers back and forth. It doesn't really work to say that things marked as confidential will be considered confidential when I'm giving you a data feed or you're pulling through all my data through an API. So broader definition of confidential information, the better. Really want to make sure that the term of confidentiality survives long enough for your purposes. Your purposes might be, if it's actual confidential information like business, proprietary information, something might only need to be confidential for a year. Something might need to be confidential for 10 years. You might be disclosing trade secrets and you want to keep it confidential in perpetuity. So you just really have to think about, for your specific situation, what do you want to do? You want to make sure, to the extent you care about it surviving after the termination of the agreement, that the provision survives the termination of the agreement for whatever period you want. So we've given you a bunch of confidential information. Now what can you do with it? Limiting the person's use of it, preferably just for the provision of services back to you, limiting the recipients to the people who have a need to know that information to provide the services back to you. That's ideal. Obviously, there is a lot of money today in collecting your data and aggregating it and selling it. So much so that they might charge you $1 to give you the service because all they really care about is getting your data and aggregating it and selling it. Maybe that's okay with you. Maybe it's not. It really depends on the type of data. Obviously, if it's customer information, PII, PHI, you may or may not. Those are different levels of security, different levels of de-identification. Most likely, you're not going to want a customer list sold to a competitor. Even if something is, by the contract terms, de-identified, you want to make sure, if you have a large market share, that it doesn't have zip codes or it's de-identified but just says which state. Well, we're the only provider in the state of that, so everybody will be able to back into our information from that. So making sure, even if you are okay allowing them to use your information for other purposes, that they really de-identify that and aggregate it on a meaningful level. And then, to the extent you don't want them using it going forward, having strong provisions on destruction and return of data. Electronic data is obviously more difficult to return or destroy. If it's certain types of data, you might even say that common carve-out is fine, but you can keep it in your normally produced backups, as long as it's not easily accessible, that sort of thing. If it's really important for you, you might have them try to delete that stuff, which is very difficult for the vendor, but it might be important enough for you. It doesn't come as a surprise that data security is an important part of the data security contract we're talking about. In these areas, it's really a balance of how do you make sure that they are doing what's really industry standard or better without giving them, without restricting a vendor too much, so that if you were to put a specific type of security program or specific type of security protocol in your contract, that it doesn't become obsolete in like 20 days. So it's a balance of how do we get the right level of information in here. So usually you do want to give your vendor some leeway in the types of things they do. So I want to make sure you have an information security program. I want to make sure that you've got protocols for if a data breach occurs, what you do, how you respond to it, all these things. Do I need to tell you exactly technically what's in there? Probably not. A, I might not have, you know, the experience or knowledge to tell you that. And B, if I were to put that as part of this agreement, it might become obsolete in 6 months, because that's just how fast things move. On the other hand, for things like system access or remote access, your companies probably have policies specifically tailored to vendors or third parties' access to your systems, remote access if they're an employee or independent contractor on a continuing basis to your systems, or on-premises access, whether they're installing or helping you with something else, that you do want to specifically say, you know, you're not going to be online at the same time as you are logged into our system. You're not going to be able to print or copy or download our information, things like that. In that instance, especially if you already have policies, you really want to tell them to follow your policies and procedures, but obviously you update those from time to time. So it's important to make sure that those policies and procedures can be updated as part of your agreement too. So you can say follow our policies and procedures as we provide them to you in writing from time to time. In this area, I would really push for something like that. They'll say, I don't know what those policies and procedures are, how can I agree to them? But, you know, well, they'll be reasonable, don't worry about it. Risk assessments and penetration testing, they are going to house or be part of hosting your data, your confidential information. What risk assessments, what audits are they performing on their facilities, both from a security standpoint, like an actual physical security standpoint, and from a data security standpoint? If you're a big dog and you have the people to put at it and you want to do it, you might require that every year they allow you to do a penetration test to make sure that your data is in fact secure. Obviously, depending on the level of data you provide, you know, if it's basic business information, you don't care as much. If it's very proprietary, you care more. PII, PHI, you care more and more. So depending on that level and your ability, you might ask for a penetration test, or you might want a summary of the tests they perform. Obviously, a lot of these things talk about the audits and the penetration test, SSAE 16, talk about where the risks are and an assessment of the risk and where the holes are. So companies don't want to widely disseminate those. But you should be able to get a summary at a minimum, and you should be able to say if any of those audits or tests show any material risks, show any vulnerabilities for our data especially, they have to be corrected, and you have to provide us information showing that they were corrected, otherwise probably terminate or do something else. I'll skip the high-tech part. You know, if you're someone where you are hiring business associates, having a business associate contract, high-tech provisions are important. Something that's fairly commonly skipped and not thought about is where will the services be performed from, and where will your data be stored? If you don't know, I'm sure just like the FBI guy was talking about, you know, trying to enforce something over in Nigeria or Romania is way different than trying to enforce something over the U.S. You know, if it's just they're doing software development over in India, fine. If you are storing data over in the Ukraine, maybe you don't like that as much. Obviously, you're going to have less access to the facilities. It's generally thought, though maybe not proper, that those facilities are less secure physically. If your data is something that you need always, they might not have business continuity disaster recovery plans as well. So the location of services can be very important. And then the notice of the breach, it'd be really nice if they told you before your clients and customers found out that their data was sent off into the ether. In the interest of time, just say, compliance with laws obviously is, I usually have a sentence there that says, the vendor will comply with all applicable laws. Great. I think it's worthwhile to call out, including without limitation, privacy laws that would be applicable. I think it's important to try to loop in things that aren't necessarily laws, but are industry standards or guidance. Talked about PCI compliance before. That's not really a law, but anybody who's processing credit card information, data like that, expect them to be PCI compliant. And then, if you're a government subcontractor and they're a subcontractor to that, obviously you need to include the appropriate federal acquisition regulation provisions, et cetera. Indemnification. So, we could probably spend a nice whole day talking about indemnification. In general, obviously, the broader the indemnification, the better. Having defend and indemnify in there is important. Hold harmless probably just means the same thing as indemnify, but defend really is an additional thing. If you want them to have to pay $1 for for them to hire an attorney to defend you in the claim, as opposed to waiting until the final adjudication of the claim, you need to have defend in there. Sometimes having a broader group of indemnities, so not just your company, but your affiliates, director's office employees, agents, anyone who might get sued in connection with it, especially since directors and officers can potentially get sued in a breach. A broad description of claims to make sure that all of the types of things that could go wrong would be great. So if you can get away with it, a provision about breach of the agreement generally is great. They might not want to be defending you for any breach of the agreement by them. So really picking out the important things, confidentiality, data security. If you can get negligence, willful acts or omissions, failure to comply with law, those are really the big ticket items here. So probably the biggest, baddest bad boy in a contract, at least if you're the purchaser of services, is a limitation of liability. If you're the purchaser, you just don't have one. Just delete that provision. Okay, well if you can't get away with that, I'd say there's a few things. One, limitation of liability provisions usually broken down in two different pieces. One that limits the punitive, incidental, consequentials, doesn't necessarily have a carve out usually. And the other one will limit your direct damages to, oftentimes in software agreements, something like a 12-month look-back, which is usually not palatable, especially if you have to go to your general counsel or CEO and say, hey, they did this terrible thing, but we can get like 10 grand back from them even though we've paid them $12 million over the last 10 years. So with respect to the first provision on the limitation of liability where you are disclaiming consequentials, et cetera, be cognizant of the use of consequentials there. Things like providing credit report services for a year, providing notices and things like that could arguably be consequential damages for a data breach. So if you have a consequential damages disclaimer that doesn't have a carve out for indemnity or for data security or for confidentiality generally, which I would say you should try to get, at least think of those types of things, that if they were to breach the agreement and third-party data were to go out, what should we say are not consequential damages? The most obvious ones are in the case of a security breach, notifying your customers, paying for the notification of your customers, because you probably are the ones who want to actually be notifying them, and then providing the year or whatever the applicable law is, length of credit monitoring. I'm of the opinion, at least when I'm on this side of the table, that you should, at a minimum, not have a direct damages cap applied indemnity. These are things that the provider of the services has done. So when we're talking about limitation of liability, it really is an artificial cap on damages caused by them, which there may be a legitimate business reason for that, like you're only paying them $50 for this piece of software, so the business model simply doesn't support everything that might go on. But if you get a third-party claim, especially for data breach, if they breached your confidential information provision, where maybe they were supposed to de-identify data, or they weren't supposed to use it for a specific purpose, or if they weren't using the commercial reasonable efforts or whatever was required under the data security provisions, those are the types of damages that you're probably going to get in trouble for with your clients and customers. So we're really talking third-party claims here anyway, and really should not be capped if you have to pay for them. Obviously, these are heavily negotiated provisions, and depending on their business model and what they're able to absorb, they may or may not be willing to work with that. And then, again, you're really setting an artificial limit on damages that were caused by them, and you don't artificially want to limit insurance that would otherwise be recoverable to you from them. So consider trying to expand the direct damages cap to something that covers what their insurance coverage would be. If they have a $5 million cyber risk policy, maybe you can say it won't be above a year's worth of fees in addition to any insurance proceeds that may be payable to us in connection with this agreement. So quickly, and again, obviously a contract works together by itself, so a great protection you can have is having termination for convenience. I'd recommend having that even if lots of software subscriptions and purchases are really designed to be 3 years just for pricing or whatever. Even if that's the case, and even if you have to pay some sort of termination fee to get out of it, I'd still recommend having the ability to term for convenience in a data breach immediately, a breach of confidential information immediately, and otherwise just for your convenience on a certain number of days. Sure, you might still have to pay them, but at least if this vendor looks like trouble, once you got into bed with them, you can get out. You might have to double pay, but you're really limiting your risk of what they might do with your data. Mentioned insurance already. Make sure they have the right types of insurance for the services they're providing, and hopefully you have someone who can actually look at the insurance. Venue, it would be great if they could come to Des Moines, Iowa, if you have an issue. Good luck with some people, but with your leverage you might be able to do that. And then assignment change of control. One, depending on what type of data they're dealing with, especially if it's proprietary to you, you'd sure hate to have them assign it to a competitor or be bought by a competitor. 2, all the due diligence you did in the procurement process kind of means nothing if they just turn around and send it to another vendor and you haven't done the due diligence. So anytime anybody is really, especially if they're taking your data into their warehouse, or if they have access to your systems, I'd really recommend restricting to the assignment and including a change of control provision to the extent possible. Say questions. Happy to stay later.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mike. All right, see if we can find my PowerPoint here.
Yeah, right there.
There we go. All right. We're good to go. Oh.
Back into this.
This is bad that I'm not getting the...
See it in the corner. No, you gotta make it larger. Go down here. There you go.
All right. All right. Well, we've switched gears on you to Ben Roach, and I'm here to talk about some cybersecurity issues from the perspective of companies as an employer. First, I know the FBI guy probably talked a little bit about this, about what kind of companies are the primary targets. As I've added to this presentation over the past couple of years, I keep adding more bullets, and pretty soon I think next year it's just going to be everyone. So that one's going to get a little easier. And the big thing is, what do all these targets have in common? Well, they've all got employees. And to go back to, when a coach speak from, when you're on your team when you're little, you're only as strong as your weakest link. Okay, so you can have 95, 99% of your employees who are great, but those hackers may find that one weak link, and that's all it takes to get into your system. And unlike Mike's advice, where you want to limit your touch points and your points of contact, unfortunately, you've got employees, and you can't generally keep them from having contact with the outside world as much as you might like to. So although there are some great technologies out there, IT can't do it all, and so your people are certainly going to play a role. So when I look at this, I kind of view that there's three main types of employee risks that are out there, and I've added a couple as I've gone that are in a little bit smaller category. The first is the selfish employee. This I would categorize a typical example as maybe the salesman who's leaving to go join a competitor. On their way out may do something stupid. Generally, their intent isn't to cause harm to the company or to cause a data breach, but that's just a result of their own selfish behavior. The second kind is the saboteur, somebody who's just mean and is just doing something out of spite. Probably won't spend a lot of time on that today because that's more in line with what the FBI guy I probably covered. The big category to me, and what I think is the biggest risk for employers out there is, I'll call them the unsophisticated employee. The one who really doesn't understand what all of the security risks out there and what some of their behaviors are doing that can create those risks and exposures. And those may be the ones where you can have the most impact on decreasing your risk of a security event. Two others that I've started adding to the list. One is we'll call it the executive who wants their special deal. They're important. They travel. They work from home. They have setups a certain way. They want to be able to use their Yahoo account because that's what they've always done. For whatever reason, they think it's better. So there are certainly some risks there. It's been in the news a little bit about a prominent government employee who used their own private email server that may have created some problems. And finally, IT. For a lot of companies, especially smaller companies, you rely so heavily on a small number of IT employees to be doing the right things and having the right procedures and protections in place, but you really don't know if they're doing it right. And so there are certainly some protections to think about there. Some of the common methods of breach, again, I think the FBI guy probably covered a lot of this before. A big one in the employment context is going to be the phishing, these attacks where they're using social engineering and other false messages to try to gain access. Another one is miscellaneous errors, let's say lost devices, exposed passwords, sending emails to the wrong place, the wrong recipient, those types of things. And so as a company, you're typically going to have a multi-layered approach to protecting your data. One, you're going to have your IT system functions, your firewalls, the things like that. Then you're going to have your contracts, like Mike talked about, or in the employee context, we may be talking more about a confidentiality agreement or a non-compete agreement. We're going to have employee training to get folks up to speed. We're going to have our policies and procedures for employees to make sure or try to make sure that they're taking the best steps to protect data. We're going to have monitoring by the IT department, and then finally, unfortunately, if something happens, we may get into an enforcement type situation where we need to look at legal action to protect our data. So the selfish employee, it's mine, it's their customers, it's their software program, it's their design, and they're going to take it on their way out. Often happens by, still to this day it amazes me, but they'll just email it from their work email account to their personal email account. So there often still is a trail there. Or they may stick in a thumb drive and download it and walk out the door with it. Again, if you catch it before IT wipes the computer, there can be a trail. But that's some of the common methods that I see that departing employees take things, and depending on how they do it, they may expose personally identifiable information into an unsecured environment that is considered a breach that may trigger your notice obligations, even though that probably wasn't their intent. So what do we do with the selfish employees? An easy layer, I think, is confidentiality agreements. Okay, not just, it doesn't have to be a full non-compete that you may have for key employees, but there really isn't any reason why you can't have a simple confidentiality agreement for all employees to protect your data. And the advantage there is, now you've got a contract. It's no fault, no intent. It's either breach or it's not. So you're not, left with the only legal ability out there to try to prove theft, which requires intent, or breach of trade secrets, which means you've got to go through all the hurdles to prove a trade secret. And the one point I want to make too on the actual terms of the confidentiality agreement with an employee is you want to be explicit about what's prohibited. Because what I have come up a lot is when the employee does email, say, a treasure trove of confidential and proprietary information to their personal account, by the terms of the agreements might only prohibit use or disclosure. I mean, is an employee email it to their personal account really use or disclosure? Okay, so somewhere, whether it be in a confidentiality agreement or in your confidentiality policy, I'm now encouraging companies to include a specific provision. You do not send anything to your personal email account. That makes it easy. It's black and white, and that's the way you can put a stop to the further dissemination of that information. And back to the selfish employee, ways to protect the company, monitoring. You may catch some of this, strange email activity or strange downloads, things like that, before things go too far. Obviously, the sooner you can catch it, the better chance you have to stop it from going places you don't want. Big thing is for exiting employees, and I think a lot of companies are doing this now, but if an employee is leaving, especially if they're going to a competitor on bad terms, we want to cut off access to that critical data that can cause problems if it's disseminated. And that's physical access, that's electronic access, and in certain circumstances, you may want to notify certain vendors or outsiders that person is no longer with you and authorized to access information. In certain circumstances, you may have to report it to the authorities, but hopefully we don't get there. There are some civil enforcement options that are out there, but unfortunately sometimes that's too late. The data is already out there. The saboteur, in the employment context, this is a little more rare. The times you may see it come up is if maybe there's announced layoffs or the employees are feeling like a layoff is coming in, so you may have somebody disgruntled, and that's where you get somebody who just may want to plant a malicious attack. That one's a little harder to deal with from an employment standpoint. There you're getting more into the systems and some of the FBI factors. You'll see at the end of this presentation, I think I included one of the FBI brochures on insider threats that may be worth a read for some of the indicators and risk factors. So the unsophisticated. I've given this presentation or versions of it around, and so if you've seen that before or heard the buzz about it, I apologize. I don't have my sweet 80s movies clips with me. I figured at the end of the day I'd be a little pressed for time, so unfortunately won't get to see Superman 3, which is the good one with Richard Pryor, or Spaceballs. But the unsophisticated employee, I used to pick on my dad for this one. He's no longer an employee anywhere, so I guess I can't do that anymore. But that's where we've got the employees who may not think about what they're doing. They may get on the free Wi-Fi at the coffee shop and work from there. They may have an easy password, or the password may be on a sticky, on their computer monitor. You don't know who's coming through there to clean at night. I mean, my guess is with the sophistication of some of these networks, I just assume most cleaning people are probably paid off by the Russian hackers, and they just know that there's a bounty out there if they find a password they can sell it to them. And so you want to be careful about those things. Losing devices is a huge issue, especially if they're not encrypted. I mean, it's a violation of HIPAA if you've got a lost laptop that's not encrypted and it's got protected health information. It's a breach. I mean, it doesn't matter if you don't know what happened to it, or it never surfaces that it's used. It just is a breach, and so it's just something that you've got to be ready to deal with. So for unsophisticated, the big thing in my mind is one, you've got to have policies and procedures in place to do the best you can to set up a security situation that they can follow to protect your data. And then you've got to train it. You've got to train folks, and it's not just what you need to do. I think it's helpful to share the why. I mean, we're not just imposing another corporate rule or employer rule on you, just because. It's explaining, you guys have seen Home Depot and Target and all these breaches, and if we don't protect our data and you don't get the employees to buy in to protect it, there can be significant harm to the company and to the reputation, and so that's why these things need to be taken seriously. But I also think you need to balance, and it needs to be usable. You can't make it so the requirements on employees, whether it be for passwords or file transfers or other things, are so onerous that all they're doing is looking for a way around it. Because somebody will, and the harder and more onerous it is, the more people are going to look for the easy way out. So it's difficult to find that balance, but I think you can't always just go 110% towards security at the maximum level. And the big thing, and I think this is where it's gotten a lot easier over the past couple of years, is you've got to have the culture of security, and it's got to come from above. It used to be a big problem. What you'd hear from IT departments is, they weren't getting the support and the resources and the buy-in from management. I think that has really shifted over the past year or two. I think there's been enough high-profile breaches, and there's been enough reputational harm out there that companies really are buying in, and management is supporting the efforts. So just briefly, system functions. More of an IT area, but it's worth checking in to make sure. The big one here I would say is on anything that moves, a USB, a laptop, a mobile device, we've got to have encryption. Again, what we're trying to do is prevent the automatic trigger, if one of these movable things gets lost or stolen. Another thing to maybe check in, and maybe seem like you know more than you do about IT, is ask your IT folks, what's our layers of access? I mean, it used to be, and some companies are still like this, once you're in as an employee, you've got access to everything. Well, what that means is once a hacker gets in, they've got access to everything. And so I always encourage companies to give some thought. Does every employee need access to everything? Or can you create internal walls, where departments only need access to their information, and the most critical data is only available to smaller subsets of people? And I know a lot of companies are doing that, but if you're not, think real hard about it. monitoring. Again, the systems are getting pretty sophisticated out there, where I think there's programs out there that can alert IT anytime stuff is sent to a Yahoo or a Gmail or other email address like that. So at least that's flagged, and if IT wants to, they can look to see what's going out to that address and why, and take a look at it. Contracts, I already kind of touched upon this. Employee confidentiality agreements can give you a little better ground to stand on if you do end up in the legal arena. Training, and this is for IT folks, for the employee handbook, and it's not just creating them, and it's not just educating employees on it, but you've got to enforce it. For the policy to have any meeting, you may have to take a hard line, and you may have to issue discipline if people are violating these policies and procedures that are in place to protect your data. If people are working around your security protocols, if people aren't using the right passwords and for some reason your system lets them do that, you need to have teeth to these policies, otherwise people just aren't going to follow them. Training, there are some really good and fairly inexpensive programs out there. If you don't have the resources to have an IT department that can do your own internal training, I mean, there's web-based programs out there that will do suspicious email and phishing training out there. One, Mike, what's the one we use? Know Before, I think is the name. This is the new cottage industry for all the ex-hackers. Once they get out of prison, they start up these security companies. But it's amazing. In an hour online tutorial, they will go through some of the key indicators of suspicious emails and how these schemes work, and they'll test. Another thing you can do is have your own internal IT department send out, a fake phishing email to your employees and see who bites. And that may help you determine, do we need to do some more training, some refresher training or some enforcement. These are steps, I think, that can help build that culture of security and help identify your weaknesses, and hopefully your employees are biting on the fake phishing email, not the real one. And that'll cover a lot of these things that I know the FBI agent talked about. That they will go through some of those indicators and hopefully help your workforce, especially those unsophisticated folks, identify what the suspicious elements are and how to avoid them. Reporting. So this is another big one. Is you want to create an open door policy with IT, and the big thing is if an employee clicks on a suspicious email or a link, and as soon as they do it, they realize, oh crap, that could be a problem. You want to have it so they can go to IT and report that, so that they can try to shut it down before it becomes a bigger problem. And again, this is balancing that enforcement, but emphasizing communication and effort, not necessarily perfection. And so you want to have that atmosphere, hopefully, where people do feel free to report if they've done something that may be an exposure, or to report on their coworkers. If they think coworkers are just blatantly violating the rules and causing problems, or maybe sort of planning their own theft, whether it be in a selfish or a saboteur situation, that they're willing to and feel free to come report that to someone. Because in all these events, time is of the essence. As soon as it leaves your doors, your system, you lose all control over it. And if you can stop it before it leaves, that's great. If you can't, every second, every minute counts before it starts bouncing around out there. And so everything you can do to try to get notice and information as soon as possible is going to be helpful. Next couple slides, I know we're getting short on time. We're at the end of the day. I got squeezed, like usually happens. There's a list here of the types of policies, and many of the names are probably familiar as you go through, but these are the policies that you may want to think about having in your handbook. The BYO device, BYOD, app standards. Here's another one if you want to sound smart to your IT guys. You got to prohibit jailbreaking. Just one, if you learn one thing from today, jailbreaking, I don't know if you have teenage kids, you might know what that is, but that's your Apple phone has the iOS operating system and won't let you go to the Apple Store to get apps and all that. Well, jailbreaking is essentially, removing that barrier and let it operate more in an open environment on the internet. And there's all sorts of other apps and things out there that can be loaded onto a phone. But what that does is now you've lost all of those security protections of the Apple and iOS device. And apparently hackers love that, and they certainly try to target devices that have been jailbroken. Sorry, just real quickly, IT, I mentioned that. You want to make sure that your IT staff is qualified to address these issues, especially if you're relying almost solely on them to set up your security standards, and don't just take their word for it. Try to make sure they have the right certifications. Be willing to invest in IT, going to training to get the right knowledge and to stay current on what the right knowledge is. Listen to your team. If you've got a non-IT person who's a techie on the side and has concerns about some of the things the IT department is doing, pay attention to that. And the last thing is consider an outside audit. Again, especially if you don't have a large enough IT team to feel like you have that independence and double check. There are firms out there who will do outside audits of your systems and identify any potential weaknesses or concerns. The executive team, already mentioned this a little bit, but the big thing is if you can invest the IT department or somebody to say no to the special deals, because it's hard. A vice president comes to a low-ranking IT guy and says, here, set this up for my Yahoo or whatever it is. In most companies, that's going to be real hard for the IT guy to say no, but hopefully if you can emphasize and set it up so they have somebody they can go to stop this. And travel and off-site is a big thing for executives, and that's why they can be so dangerous, even though they think they won't make the mistake. Monitoring, that's mostly a system function, but make sure you have a policy or a notice that pops up to let employees know this is our system, we have the right to monitor it, you have no expectation of privacy. Not that there's any hard and fast privacy rule out there right now, but let's just avoid that issue ever coming up. Finally, enforcement, legal action, hopefully never get there, but if something does go out the door, there are some options out there, but they're not as good as if it never leaves the door. There's a couple resources out there on some data breach information. There's that FBI pamphlet, and that's it. If anybody has any questions, feel free to let me know.